study from Carter's Lane Baptist Church. In recent weeks, Black Lives Matters has become a very important issue, long overdue, and I thought it'd be sensible to spend some time today talking to Annette Adkins, who can explain far better than I some of the issues that lie behind it. Let's start, first of all, with her thoughts about our own church.
As a black woman at Carter's Lane Baptist Church, I feel as part of a family. I don't feel I'm a black woman. I feel I'm just Annette, or Nettie, as I'm known amongst family and friends at the church. But I am very much aware of Black Lives Matter, and I'm also aware of myself as a black woman. I don't ignore the fact of that, but it's a really friendly church. It's a loving church. We've been going for over 15 years, and everyone's been really welcoming to myself and family, and we feel really close, so I don't feel that I'm different or look different when I'm at that church.
However, before you came to Carter's Lane, you did experience some pretty shocking times, not just in church life, but in nursing and indeed in romance. Are you happy to talk about those?
Yeah. I went into nursing aged 18, and I already had the required qualifications to go and do my SRN training. But once I went for interviews, I found that I was being offered to do enrolled nurse training. Now, I have to admit, at the time, I didn't really know there was a difference, except one course was shorter than the other, and I was reassured that I'd be qualified sooner, so I chose enrolled nurse training. I was 18 and didn't really know any difference, and it wasn't until I started my training that I did realise that I was nurse training, and at the hospital where I trained, most of the enrolled nurses were actually black girls.
A state registered nurse is better trained and will have more salary than a state enrolled nurse.
Oh yes, and opportunities, yeah, absolutely. As an enrolled nurse, you can't be promoted, whereas as an SRN, I could have gone on to be promoted and get more opportunities, but it wasn't open to me. I was guided directly to becoming an enrolled nurse, and I had no mentors to guide me. My parents didn't really know.
And this was the experience of those people who happened to be black.
Oh gosh, I remember trying to apply to get onto Upgrade, an SRN training course. We had to take a test, and there were 20 of us in the room. I can still see it now. 20 of us in the room. 18 of us were black girls, and there were 2 white guys. And all of us, the black girls, failed maths and English tests, despite the fact that I had the maths and English qualifications anyway. We were told we failed, and I asked to see my test paper, and they refused. They told me to come back 6 months later, and I tried. They said no. So I left nursing and retrained as a teacher. It has had a lasting effect, because it just made me feel that I wasn't very bright, hence why I pursued a degree and a master's.
Annette's challenges were not just in nursing. They also happened in church life and in romance. And she was good enough to explain how.
So when I was a very young child, going to a black-led church with my parents, and then when we moved, we went to Baptist church, and that there you definitely felt that you were different. As a black child, I knew that I was being discriminated against. You know about racism, but your parents never really spoke about it. There was one occasion where I was helping out in the youth group, and I invited the local newspaper to come and see what we were doing. We were doing something with the kids. They came along and they spoke to me. I was about 16 at the time, asked me some questions about the work we were doing, and also spoke to one of the other youth leaders as well. They printed the article, quoted me, and a few weeks later, whilst I was at church, the minister pulled me to one side and shouted at me, who did I think I was, and that I shouldn't have spoken, answered any questions. It was up to the other youth leader, who was a white guy at the time, and he actually said, you should know your place. And I left that church and walked away.
Meeting the love of your life, Roger.
Yes. Yeah, that was back in 1982. Love at first sight in both our cases, but of course then it was unusual to see a mixed race couple that looked like us. It didn't happen all the time, but there were times when you'd hear the N-word shouted at us, and poor Rog didn't sort of quite know. He got angry, but I would calm him down, because I'd say, well, actually, it's not unusual. You'd go in a pub or restaurant, we got stared at. There was one occasion when we were married by this point, got married in 86, and we went to Wales for a few days away, romantic break, and we thought we'd just stay somewhere. It was midwinter, midweek, it wasn't during the school holidays, and we tried to stay at an inn. Went in, it was empty, the car park was empty, it was lunchtime, and it had rooms, and we asked, can we book a room? And the lady looked at me, and she said, we're fully booked. We can't prove it, but we just knew that she was not happy having us staying there. Just knew she didn't want us there. But I was annoyed. I was angry, and I said to Rog, "No, come on, forget a few days away. Let's go home." And we did. We went home. That wasn't very nice. It hurts every time, but you feel this is coming. This is coming. So you're sort of on your guard.
One of the important things about Black Lives Matter is to show that, well, even if people aren't intentionally racist, there are question marks about our unconscious bias. I asked Annette to tell us a little more about that.
So, yeah, there was a research back in the 50s of unconscious bias, and they were looking at very young children had unconscious bias. A research was carried out with a group of 4-year-old American black children. They put in front of these little ones a black doll and a white doll, and they asked the children which doll they liked to play with, which doll was the nice doll, and which doll was the bad doll. And all of them chose the white doll as the nice doll. As they got further into the interview, they actually asked the children, which doll looks like you? Each child paused, because they wanted to say that they looked like the white doll, but actually they looked like the black doll. What was interesting on watching that research, you can watch the research online, is that they would choose the white doll to say the white doll looked like them except one. And you could see them pausing, thinking, actually I look like the other doll. And it showed that they all have unconscious bias. And I have to say that I can remember being terrified of black dolls myself. Everyone has unconscious bias. I think it's important to recognise that it's easy to say, for people to say, I don't see colour. But actually, this is how God made me. You made me as a black female. And so I want people to see that I'm a black female, but actually I'm as important as anyone else. But I am aware that I have to sometimes, especially when I'm out somewhere, that you sort of want to be on your P's and Q's, because people are going to judge you by what you say, but what you do. People often refer to black women as being quite aggressive, but we're not. I can remember as a child being asked, what colour's your blood? Do you have the same feelings as we do? And also another thing as a youngster was I always felt as a child that I was treated as an adult, whereas other white children were treated as kids. But we were spoken to as if we were adults and as if we should know.
One of the things that I've heard people say who are defending the Black Lives Matter movement and saying things like, the difference for me as a white person is that my parents didn't ever have to tell me how I should talk to a police officer.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, yeah.
And we call that, I think, white privilege now.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly in our case, I know that when we were growing up, we were told that, how to speak to the police. And I know I've got mixed-race children. And, when they got to secondary school age, both of them, a boy and a girl, Roger and I sat down and had conversations with them about, be aware that you could be stopped because of the colour of your skin, even though they're mixed race, and to be aware and to have that conversation. And I know that other friends who are black will have had conversations like that with their own children, actually, whether they're girls or boys. So, it must be nice to be able to go somewhere and not have to worry about being stopped or being stared at or being judged simply on the colour of your skin.
So what exactly, in your mind, is white privilege?
Being able to go about your everyday life without having to think about it, without, being able to apply for a job. My maiden name is a foreign-sounding name, and I found out when I got married that it was easier to get a job interview. It must be wonderful. I mean, certainly, even as a teacher, as an educator, people walking into the room and asking, where's the trainer? And I'm standing at the front of the room. Doesn't happen often, and people actually apologise and are embarrassed by it. I'll give you an example of unconscious bias that might surprise people. People know that my husband's a nurse, and this happened years ago, and he said, do tell them this story. He had a patient that he needed to meet and speak to, but all he knew was that this patient was on a ward, and he knew the patient's name, and he also knew that this patient was a doctor. He went up to the ward and was told that the patient was in a 2-bedded bay. Walked in, and there was a black gentleman in the bed and a white gentleman in another bed. And as I said, my husband knew the gentleman's name and the fact that he was a doctor. Now, we've been married for nearly 30 years. He turned to the white gentleman and said, "Dr. such and such," and the black gentleman answered. Roger was mortified. His unconscious bias kicked in. A doctor, a white gentleman. I'm amazed he came home and told me what had happened.
And that leads us to ask ourselves, all of us, some perhaps uncomfortable questions about our own unconscious bias, our own unwitting racism.
A lot of people would say, "No, I'm not racist," and I get that. I totally understand that. But we've all got biases that we're not aware of. We've all been brought up in a certain way, how to speak to people, how to see people, and sometimes with the best will in the world, your unconscious bias can step in. And the way to deal with unconscious bias is to recognise that it's there. And by recognising it, you find that you keep yourself in check.
Annette, we all need to understand the biases that we have, and maybe there are different ways in which you can help us with that. But for now, can I say on behalf of the church, thank you for your honesty, thank you for your candour.
Very welcome, very welcome.